Good afternoon, scaredy cats. Hope you enjoy the video today and please like, comment, and subscribe. Followed from the graveyard, this is an experience that occurred over several months in the autumn of 2012. I was home from university one weekend. On the outskirts of my town there is an old graveyard called the Red River Cemetery. It is very old and associated with an abundance of local history. The Great Revival of 1800 occurred there. The first camp meeting in Christian history. A lot of spiritual activity happened at that event. This cemetery is a regular spot for me. It is a pleasant drive into the fresh country, and the entire graveyard is surrounded by ancient trees. In the back of the cemetery is a reconstruction of a log church that was once there. You feel as if you are going back in time when you go there. It is serenely silent and still, and there is a nostalgia with all the graves and arrangement of trees. In the center of the cemetery is a separate walled graveyard. It is an elaborate family plot, and the old wall dates to the 1830s. There are many graves in there, and one has sunken in and opened. I walked around the plot for a few moments. I had come here many times before, and nothing strange had ever happened, but this time I had an unpleasant feeling. It wasn't very strong, but I felt that I should get out of this plot. I did so, and continued to walk around the cemetery. Then it started. That night I mostly had insomnia, but I did drift into sleep eventually. The line between the two is blurred, but I definitely know that I was awake most of the night. In lack of a better term, my mind was tormented seemingly out of nowhere. My mind burned with the image of these two particular graves in the back of the walled plot. It was scorched in my mind. I had nightmares of these two graves, and never could I get my mind off them. It was something I've never experienced before. The thought and image of these graves blared and blared in my mind, and I felt terrified. I knew I was awake, and I was afraid in my own home. I felt I wasn't alone. I covered myself in the middle of my bed with this torturing thought of these two graves. As the night wore on, the thought or nightmare, I had a dream of the people buried there. I remember specifically seeing a man, young but I couldn't tell how young, and his face was a blur. He wore brownish-beige clothes, pre-1850-ish style. He may have held pale hair, but I can't recall specifically. He was a little heavyset. Not fat, just big. This image is crystal clear in my mind, and in my torment I knew it was one of the people buried in those graves. This incident was absolutely dreadful. The next day I was emotionally disturbed. My parents didn't know what to think. If I thought about my experience, I would start to cry. A few odd things happened that can be attributed to coincidence, but nevertheless odd. My dog was barking at nothing. Then the washing machine went crazy and starting moving. The repairman said a part inside had gotten loose. It had never done that, nor has it again. This could be coincidence. Eventually, I put it out of my mind. It was disturbing, but I couldn't let it get in the way of my studies, so I carried on with my life. Then came the spring of 2013. I became curious again about those graves. I wondered, just who are buried in those graves? I thought if I found out, some sort of mystery would be solved or a question would be answered. So I gathered my courage and went back to the cemetery. I found the two graves. They were there. I wrote down the names, but misplaced the exact information. But the individuals were two siblings. There was a Jane, and she passed away when she was 28 and had 3 children. Her brother's name was Chatham. He died when he was 21 or 22 in the 1810s. They were the children of a Kentucky senator who was also buried nearby, and the site of their old family home is nearby. Nobody special, and I thought little of it. That very night I woke up at exactly 3:30 a.m. Insomnia again. I had been awake for a few moments, and then my doorknob wiggled. I stared wide-eyed at it. For the longest time it had just wiggled. My first thought is that it was my cat. Sometimes she opens the porch door, then tries to open our doors. I prayed to God, please let that have been my cat, then I can sleep in peace. I convinced myself it was my cat. The next morning, my cat was on the porch, and the porch door happened to be locked. Kitty had not snuck in, so I interrogated my mom, dad, and brother. They ardently denied my accusations. They wouldn't do that. Then the next night came, and I awoke again at 3:30 or 4:30 when I went to bed. My brother, who was in the den, was watching TV, but here I was awake again, and I could see the light on in the den under the door. Then my door opened. I heard the doorknob turn, and it slowly opened, about halfway. Then it began to close again, but didn't close all the way. Then there was a flash of light in the den, and it went dark. I stared at it for a while. I thought it was my brother, because I thought he stayed up all night watching his show, and opened my door for some reason. Thus, I wasn't scared, and I got up and closed the door. I attempted to go back to sleep, but was a little bothered. I asked him about it the next morning. He didn't know what I was talking about, because he swore he went to bed at midnight and he has no history of sleepwalking. I did my usual interrogation and everyone denied it. I was abashed and became frightened. Later that day, I was on the computer and heard my mom scream my name twice, as if from outside, like she needed help. I rushed outside to go to her aid. She was calmly tending the garden. She looked startled when I got there. "What's wrong?" I asked out of breath. "I heard you scream my name." She said she never did and looked at me like I was crazy. She thought I was playing a joke on her. She'd never play a joke like this on me. Since this moment, nothing has happened with the incident. I even went back to the graveyard and got no bad feelings. Haunted by a ghost girl. I have lived in my house all my life and I never believed in ghosts until about 2 years ago. In 2010, I remember seeing hints, as a kid, involving things moving, shadows crossing mirrors, or in the corner of my eye, and an occasional whisper. I had dismissed it as being only in my mind. However, not long after my 13th birthday in October, I found a small flower on my bed. When I looked up about flowers, I found out that this flower was of black-eyed Susan. I received this flower a few times over the course of 5 weeks, and each time the flower was either slightly wilted or wilted. When I addressed my parents about it, they had worried looks, but told me I was imagining things. After another month had passed, I found actual writing in my diary. It only said, "Adeline." When I showed it to my parents, they claimed I had written that, and even though it was clearly not my handwriting because I had terrible cursive handwriting, whereas the writing in the diary was perfect cursive. That night while I was sleeping on the top part of my bunk bed, I could hear someone moving in the lower bunk. When I looked and saw no one there, I again dismissed it as my imagination. That very night I had a dream of a dark-haired girl sitting in a field of flowers, and when she turned to look at me, she had no face. When I woke up at 3:23 a.m., I heard a soft voice calling my name. After that, I didn't have anything happen to me until my 14th birthday. I was talking to one of my friends on the phone on November 16th at around 11:30, and suddenly the phone went dead. I was about to put the phone down when the phone opened up again. I thought my friend was still on the other side, so I asked, "Are you still there?" But then a small, timid-sounding voice whispered, "I am here and I am waiting." I freaked out and I slammed the phone into the receiver. I then looked up on the internet about my house. This was when I actually learned about the history of the house. Apparently it is over 50 years old and the previous family had moved out due to the untimely death of one of the girls in the household. Since the remaining family member lived several blocks away from me, I decided to pay them a visit. When I was riding there on my bike, I passed a large, dead field. It took me a moment to recognize it, but it was definitely the field from my dream. When I got to the house, an elderly woman answered the door. When I told her that I came to her to inquire about her sister, she let me in. She told me that her sister had been disliked by the parents due to her choice of friends and the fact that she never did anything right. The father even beat her because of that. She began to be disobedient, often leaving the house without permission to be with her friends. Then one night she came home at 3 a.m., crying. Her parents were awakened and began yelling at her about staying late and also that she was making a huge fuss. Then the sister got into bed and cried. Abby thought that she would be okay and fell back asleep after her sister got into bed. However, in the morning, the sister was not in bed. Abby finally found her 20 minutes later in the bathroom next to her bedroom, pills in hand. She had killed herself by overdosing on medicine. The sister's name was Adeline. Then Abby showed me a picture of the girl and I started shaking. It was clearly the girl from my dream. I told Abby about the strange phenomena occurring in my house and Abby said that Adeline's restlessness was the reason they moved out in the first place. She asked my name and when I told her, Abby's eyes widened. Amanda was the name of Adeline's closest friend, who had visited her often. She told me that I looked like her. When I told her about the flower, she said that the black-eyed Susan was Adeline's favorite flower. I'm not sure if I should be worried, but for now it appears Adeline wants to talk to me. She seems to be benign, but what should I do in the meantime?